we're going to have the tough conversation today about money. And I think that's always the difficult part, especially in a new, well, very new idea in Africa, or not per se new. 15 years is quite new if we compare it to the 100-year-old mining industry. And today I'm here with a panel of people that are probably twice my age, so I am rather intimidated. So please forgive me if I do stutter. We're going to just talk today. I've actually joined here with Derek, who I had a nice conversation with yesterday, just based on what we're going to talk about today. And Derek, would you just like to start by introducing yourselves? Can everybody just introduce themselves and let us get to know you a bit better?
Okay, well, I've been covering renewables in sub-Saharan Africa for about 3 years, looking at business models, financing, economics, policies behind it, and then work on a couple of large-scale consulting projects around global climate scope, which is an index and a report that looks at climate for clean energy investments in developing countries.
Hi, I'm Mitch Brand from Nedbank Capital. I've got 20 years of energy experience, and as most of you should know, Nedbank's quite active in the renewable energy space. So we're currently focusing on diversifying our exposure and also starting to looking at potential hybrid mining investments.
My name is Daniel Goldstein. I'm not sure I'm double the age of Emmanuel, but anyway. I represent GG Energy. I'm a founder of GG Energy, which was founded about 2 years ago, focusing on the mining and industrial space. We have around 200 megawatts worth of power in very renewable sources under development currently, looking basically at essentially the mining and industrial world and delivering, as our line is, that Adrian used yesterday, stable power at stable prices.
My name is Enrique Collado. I'm representing San Edison, one of the main sponsors of this event. As you probably know, we're very, very active in South Africa, both in solar and wind. We've been awarded actually 450 megawatts in the last round 4, plus we have 130 megawatts operating already, and we're acquiring operating assets as well in South Africa. So yeah, we're keen to discuss about financing. I think it's an interesting challenge, and let's see what happens.
Thanks, everyone. I'm definitely not double his age. Being the only woman on this panel, I am insulted, but I'll get you afterwards. But anyway, thanks, everybody. I'm Rensha van Tonder. I'm involved in a whole range of projects in Standard Bank, and we've been quite successful in supporting the industry in growing in South Africa, specifically looking at other opportunities and also how we can take renewable actually to the next step in the country. And I think it's a very topical discussion that we have today, and pleased to join it. Thank you.
We're going to go through a couple of questions today. I'm actually going to hit it off the bat with the question which we all know, that currently there is a hurdle in trying to finance this thing. We have a developer that's willing to do the work and put it down and get it going. But then on the other side, we have the mind that says, I've been doing this for 100 years. Why must I change something that's not broken? And what are the challenges with financing some of these deals? What are the hurdles? What is it? Is it the mind that's the problem? Is it the money that's the problem? Or is it the developer? Or are we not working together? What are those common hurdles? And I'd like to address that question to Rita.
Thanks. Probably all my sins have to go first, but it's fine. I think it's a very topical question, and I can sit here today and blame the mines and blame the power players, and also say that the banks are stuck in the middle and we try to find a solution, but then you have to face your credit committees, which is the reality. But what is very important is to actually unpack the funding models and to find the bridge between giving a sustainable power solution that provide quality power consistently to a mine, and at the same time looking at what is the mine actually requiring. Of course, when you look at the mining solution and what power solution can be sustainable, from a mining perspective, it's very critical to understand what will be my balance sheet impact. Do I have to provide support? Can I come into a project finance structure in a SPV that can actually facilitate a workable solution when I present to my board, when I'm actually used to payback periods of 5 years, very good returns, not really always fluctuations or annuity type income that you will see from a power solution. At the same time, you have a power player that will come into a SPV structure and say, I'm in the power game, I know how to do it, so I'll give you a solution, just sign my PPA and let's get going. But it's not that simple, and I think we've realized that when we've been approached by a number of our clients, since we bank a significant portion of the mining sector, it's not that easy. And I think the starting point, which has been debated and discussed over the last 2 days, is twofold. It's a life of the mine, and secondly, who's your credit off-taker? And people often say to us, why do you like the government program? And I mean, it's always, when we untap that, you say, it's mainly because of the government guarantee backing up Eskom PPA. And it brings you back to, why do we struggle to find solutions to really get going with the mining sector and long-term PPAs? And at the end of the day, you have to analyze that credit risk, because you're looking at a corporate. I think that is where you start to unpack, can you put longer-term finance than 5 years into a corporate? Are you comfortable with the credit rating, with the risk you're taking? And how do you find a structure in a SPV type of relationship where you have competent sponsors on the power side and match that with a funding solution that's suitable to a mine that does not want to take that on balance sheet? So I think it's not an easy answer, and I certainly welcome the likes of the IFC and what they shared earlier, because we need partnerships to really take this forward.
Talk about partnerships. From a developer side, what are the hurdles that you face with financing some of these deals? Enrique.
Look, not too different from what Rensha was saying. Actually, as equity sponsors as well, we sometimes struggle with the same issues, right? So, duration of the PPA, hence duration, life of the mine, quality of the off-taker, is it investment grade, is it not investment grade, impacts in the balance sheet of the off-taker, which make your offer less compelling if it has an impact in the balance sheet. So more or less the same issues. And what we're trying to do is to being ahead of the curve and find innovative solutions and try to discuss them with the banks. And that's what we're trying to do. And there is ways to solve some of the problems. Some of them were discussed by IFC before. You can think about clustering. You can think about having alternative off-takers. There's ways to solve most of these issues, right? So I'm pretty positive. I think we will end up finding a solution together with the banks. But for sure, as a developer and an equity sponsor, we need the banks to be aligned with us. But I think we're getting closer.
Daniel?
I think the key points have been made already, but also sort of more about how you structure a deal and how you bring the whole thing together and who you involve in that, who you involve, whether it be ECA or DFI or any other type of finance, in order to be able to bring down the levelized cost of electricity to the consumer. And a lot of that is linked to the quality of the off-taker and their bankability. But you need to be conscious of them not suffering financially, and therefore the ability to bring in other people and dilute risk in that way is the most important thing here.
Yes, just to add to what the previous speakers have said, as we're on a mining conference, I think it's important for us as funders to have a look at from the perspective of a mine as well. I think a number of speakers today alluded previously that, I mean, miners aren't in the business of running power stations. They're also not in the business of project financing these type of projects. And I think the importance for the developers and the equity sponsors, as Enrico has indicated, is that the focus should be to give the mine a solution which they are comfortable and which they can easily digest. And I mean, at the end of the day, in a project finance type of structure, what is important for the funders is the interface in terms of the PPA. And as far as I'm concerned, that should be the main focus and the only focus which a mine should have a look at. And the focus should be to indicate to them a technical solution which is viable in terms of a cost structure which is linked to the life of their mine, and the only obligation from their side to give you a PPA. And then from that perspective, the sponsors and the developers should form a partnership together with the bankers, not only to propose a technical solution to the mines, because I think currently there's hundreds of technical solutions which float to the mines, and the mines are totally bamboozled in terms of what is the best option, but to rather give a technical solution which is bankable and which got a project financing structure behind them.
All right. Okay, so we've got that. We've found out that it may be a bit difficult to get that going in terms of you being the developer, me being the mine. Who owns it? Are there what various structures of ownership can we incorporate to this? Is it the mine that takes on that complete risk? Do I buy into the renewable energy idea, or do we go at it together? What are the various options that we can take going forward to do these projects?
I think the first thing, mines don't want to do a self-build, or it's pretty rare for them to do it just given the upfront capex cost. There's probably 1 or 2 examples out there of mines who have done it. I mean, I know of one 9 megawatt wind farm in Canada. Outside of that, it is pretty rare. It's a big balance sheet, that's or what they would have to swallow capex wise. So you have to start thinking outside of that to other solutions. Does a leasing model work? Can you use a PPA, or do you look at JVs? There are other options that need to be explored, and it's all about, at the end of the day, what's going to suit the mine and the financiers the best, really.
And you say JVs. Are there any examples of JVs that have worked so far? Any examples that anyone can think of where we say the mine and the developer have come together and said, let's build up a model that works on both ends? Enrique.
Okay, this one is working. No, I think I haven't seen that model, but I think as a sponsor, I don't see any problem in doing that model. I see advantages and disadvantages, but if the mine is keen to be involved in and put some equity in these projects, I think as a sponsor we will feel even more comfortable probably, and probably the lender as well, because the mine is putting some money in the game. So I think it could be positive as long as the mine is ready to put some equity at risk. However, we think that for a mine it makes more sense not to put their equity in these type of projects. It should be, I think, the responsibility of the developer, because we know the risk, we know how to build, finance, and operate these type of plants. So from the mine perspective, I don't see yet what is the advantage of putting their money in these projects, to be honest. But as a developer, we're keen to bring them on board, for sure.
I think the key thing here is actually that it goes back to the technical solution in a way, and it depends on the status of any mine, any mining company, to work with them both on what the right solution is for them, both financially and technically. And I think if you look at that, you go back to kind of for many years, people have not built their own bricks and mortar. You know, if any of the big supermarkets or banks or whoever they are often go out to a developer or a constructor, and they look to work together to develop a solution that they want. Very rarely do they put all their own money in it. They may put some of their own money in if it suits them at that stage in time, but often it's around the solution on both technically and financially.
And are there any pros, or what are the biggest pros to having some sort of different ownership structures too?
I think a big pro from a bank's perspective, and Nedbank and Standard Bank will give a lot more light than me. I think if they felt that they had part, in association to a PPA, some equity from the mining company themselves, they've got them on 2 hooks, not just one.
I'll give Mitch an opportunity to comment as well, but certainly from our side, I think if you can facilitate some sort of net metering allowance as well, it may enhance some revenue flow to the mine as well, which could make it more viable for the mine to say, I would like to have some sort of equity stake and have some skin in the game apart from the PPA I'm prepared to sign. So it depends on the model that you have on the table and the opportunity, but I do think that that could unlock future revenue and a benefit to the mine as well, if you look at it from that perspective.
Yes, no, I mean, from a Nedbank perspective, clearly the sponsor group is important to us and the equity guys, and not only in terms of the size of balance sheet which they bring to the table, but more in terms of commitment and showing interest and participation in the project. Having sponsors who are also on the equity side, and then obviously giving the PPA obviously would be to our benefit, and we wouldn't see that in a negative perspective, although there wouldn't be a requirement that the mining house should participate on the sponsor side.
Yeah, I just want to add something. I think the other advantage of having the sponsor owning the plant is obviously it's their own money, it's their own risk. They will take care that the asset is functioning well within 20 years. While if this is not the case, you know, we will feel the ownership and we will take care of the asset in the long term, which is very important. I think getting the right level of performance in the plant and providing the right yield is key.
And then from a lender's side, I'm just going to ask this question. How are the lenders addressing these issues given the strong interest from the mines? I mean, the mines are looking for a power solution. How are the banks taking a step forward and saying, okay, this is what you guys want. How can we make it work? What are the banks doing there to make it more attractive for the mines?
Yes, I think, I mean, from a banking perspective, obviously, specifically from a project financing perspective, it makes it possible for the mines to do these deals off balance sheet. And the added contribution of the banks, which we see playing an important role, and I think Jan in his presentation just before this panel has alluded to that, is to form some kind of structure and feasibility support to mines at minimal risk to the mines in terms of structuring these type of deals and coming up with a bankable project finance type of solution to the mines, which the mines can take and pursue or not. So I mean, at the end of the day, I think that's an added contribution of the banks and the funders. And I mean, I think there's partnerships available between the commercial banks, the DFIs, potential ECA funding, which we can assist in terms of putting these finance structures together, which then is up to the mines to make an option if they want to pursue or not.
I think to add to that, what we found, and I'm talking now from experience in the last, especially the last 12 months, where the situation around power and supply to the mines has become more of a reality, as a real issue, is that many mining companies that we do bank actually reach out to us and say to us, listen, we do see your presence in the power space. Can you come and just spend some time with us and share some of the solutions that we could consider, and also introduce us to potential power players, developers, partners. And one of the other questions that we do get faced with is there development capital out there to assist us to do the feasibilities. And I think that's where the likes of IFC, what Jan shared, is critical. So what we find is that we become almost a facilitator of introducing the various players around the table to the different partners. And I think that's a very important role that the bank should not ignore. It's not necessarily that we will end up financing that proposal or have a bankable solution, but at least we can get the partners around the table and share some of our experiences, although it may not be on a specific mining power intervention. And Daniel is sitting here. We're working with him at the moment with a project in Tanzania, and it's not always easy. But as a bank, it's very important to work with your partners, unpack the issues, and find a way to see how you can address it, and always try and be flexible. And I know many of you may say, banks are not flexible, but I can assure you, when your client is the bank and they're under pressure to repay certain corporate loans to you because of a power situation and a challenge, you certainly try to be more open to try and facilitate various solutions to assist with sustainability that will ultimately impact your client on the mining side as well.
It's funny you say that. I was reading a quote the other day that says, if I owe the bank $100, that's my problem. The moment I owe the bank $1 million, that's the bank's problem. So I can completely understand where you're coming from. And I think you mentioned now with Tanzania, there are political and different countries that have different risks. And how do we mitigate those risks? How do we sit around a table and say, well, look, I have a project in Angola or wherever it may be, in South Africa. What are the political risks there, and what is the potential outcome of that? What can I gain from investing in that in such a climate?
I think there are a number of different factors here. There are certain countries in the world that are bankable and certain countries that are not. And there are certain countries that sit in the middle of those two pieces. But one of the things I think you have to remember is that when you're dealing with the mining sector particularly, and you've got a situation where you can have a UK or Canadian or South African or wherever it may be listed business, if you can get yourself guarantees out of that kind of foreign entity, effectively your main risk is actually a physical risk on the ground. So you've actually got the risk of actually whether the mine is going to be reclaimed by the state and that sort of stuff. And that's actually your lasting risk, because there are other structures you can do by way of guaranteeing the PPA and guaranteeing payments out of a local economy. And therefore your risks are mitigated to a large degree. You can also further mitigate the risks by using ECA or DFI and actually and insuring against those risks by political risk insurance. So effectively what you're doing is actually kind of removing most of the risk from the local country risk. There are countries in the world, there was a story a while ago about it, I won't mention any of the countries or mine involved, where we had actually been approached about doing a project in a mine, which we were dealing with, and for a number of different reasons based on life of mine, it didn't look like it was going to go anywhere. And then after that, about 3 months later, I found out that actually that mine had been bombed from the air by a neighboring air force. I'm not sure necessarily that would be insurable.
Anyone like to add? Enrique, would you like to add to that at all?
I think Daniel explained very well what the solutions are. I think most of the countries in Africa can get MEGA insurance, OPEC insurance. So there's several suppliers of these stuff, even private insurers like E.ON or Munich Re or AIG can provide this type of insurance. So there's a lot of options in the market. So I don't think it's a big issue, and it's, as long as it's insurable, and it is.
And with mines especially, I think there's always the question of life of mine. I mean, I'm a trader, so funny enough, I'm a coal trader. I mean, it's been one of the weirdest things coming to Renewables Conference, and everybody's like, what? You sell coal? And the thing is, where I look at it, and he was saying to me the other day, he was saying to me yesterday, that a coal trader at one point was the big whale in the room, and then now he feels like he's the crack addict at the corner trying to sell everybody something. And that's how I felt the whole week. But I think what's so beautiful about the idea, and as a young, I'm speaking just plainly on experience here, as a small company, and really just trying to put our stamp out there. I think, would you find that with your older running mining companies and your younger running, who's more attracted to these sort of ideas? Is it the older, bigger companies, or do you think the gap would be with the smaller, growing, and more sort of in touch with the times, for lack of a better word? What would you say? Just out of interest.
I mean, I think anyone, it depends if the solution makes sense, anyone will do it. We've seen a lot in the press here about local mines looking to do PV, to do solar thermal. They are looking at it. It doesn't depend on whether you're new into the game or old into the game. It's about what solution makes sense to you as an owner. It doesn't make sense for you to go and build a 20 megawatt PV plant, or do you carry on trying to rely on Eskom and the grid? It's just what makes sense financially for a mine to do it.
No, true. But I have a mine. It's only 7 years of life. What happens to that's why I think I asked my question the wrong way, is that what happens with your investment? You are outlaying money, and this is, I've got a 7-year life of mine. You probably have 6 years or 5 years to pay it back. What are the guarantees, and how can we structure a deal that works around that? How do we say, after your life of mine is gone, what is the next step? What do we do after that?
I think there's a tipping point around life of mine and whether the mine is on grid or off grid. If you're on grid and if you're off grid and you're burning diesel 24/7, there may be a kind of 7 to 10 year window where actually you could structure a renewable project that actually would be able to pay back, because you'd still be able to beat the price you're paying on the diesel. But actually, if you're looking at a 5-year life of mine, you're struggling. I don't think again, it's about the solution to the specific situation and what you're dealing with. If you're on grid or off grid, if you've got options to maybe to do a deal with a neighboring asset, or maybe to be able to do a deal with the local authority in terms of funding into the grid and having a longer term PPA with them, it very much depends upon the circumstances. And I don't think you can be bespoke to an answer to the question by saying it's X, Y, or Z, because it depends if you're in South Africa or if you're in Ghana or Tanzania or wherever you may be. Everywhere has its own challenges and solutions, potentially.
Are there any, oh, sorry.
Yeah, I agree with Daniel. I think it's very much on a case by case, and you know, in countries. So it's really much on a case by case, and we've seen, and I think AFC mentioned that before. I think clustering can be, for example, an option. And we've seen that in Africa, in countries in Africa, even in South Africa, initiatives of putting mines together, and even within the same group. You can think about building a bigger PV plant, whatever, and connect that PV plant to several mines with different type of lives. And the kind of, so that the weighted average life of the portfolio is still reasonable, right? So there's ways, and again, it's on a case by case. We also discuss, I mean, it has been discussed before, the wheeling option. I think wheeling is an option, for example, in South Africa. Still a bit expensive, but it's getting there. And if you think about building a big plant in a high radiation area and connecting that plant through wheeling to several mines, that's possible. That could be possible. That's not.
Can I just add one other point, actually? The other point to make, if you're looking at solar PV, for example, is that the panels can be reusable. So we've got a situation, actually, we're talking to somebody about at the moment, where they're looking at a mine that they're prepared to sign a 7 to 10 year PPA on a current mine, but they've got an asset that's about 150 kilometers away from there, then actually they would be happy to price in, be able to reuse those panels in 7 to 10 years at the second asset. So there are, again, lots of different options here. I think the key thing is to never have a closed book to any idea.
And are there any innovative finance solutions to some of these shorter term life of mines from the bank side? How do I make it bankable? You know, at the end of the day, if I have a 5-year project, I'd like to bring this innovation in. How do I make this bankable to you? How do I make it attractive to the banks?
I see Mitch is still thinking. So. It's not an easy answer, and I think that is one of the biggest hurdles, especially with the type of numbers you're mentioning, 5 years, 7 years. I mean, especially in South Africa, I don't believe that you can have a payback of 5 years for a PV project, and we will not. If you have a life of mine for 7 years, let me not say not, but I mean it's very, very difficult to provide a longer tenor loan than, let's say, 5 years, because you need to have a tail. If you have in other countries where you are more relying on a diesel and other type of solutions, it may be more worthwhile. And your payback will be shorter. So from that perspective, it may be easier to do these type of transactions in other countries where your payback is closer to a 5-year solution, although your life of mine may be 7 years, then it's still doable. But as soon as you get into the point where your payback is 10 years, your life of mine is 7 years, and you ask for a 10-year loan, I mean, that is just not doable. So that's the type of challenges we sit with. I do believe clustering may be an option, but again, from a funding point of view, you need to look at the underlying credit profile, risk profile, and analyze the different entities that you will be able to sign up in terms of your offtake and to what extent the average life of mine will cover your tenure of your loan. So I don't think it's an easy answer. Again, maybe one could look at credit enhancement instruments, type of insurance instruments. It's doable, but I always say you need to have a willing partner on the other side, being the mine, the off-taker, a willing developer next to you, and then of course a willing bank that's prepared to explore different flexible solutions. And that for me is the solution at the end of the day.
Yes, no, I mean, I don't have a lot to add to what Rensha says. I don't think there is out-of-the-box creative funding solutions from a project finance perspective for these type of projects. I think, I mean, the one which might be considered by banks is, as Rensha mentioned, the clustering concept between a number of mines, which makes it complex if you look on a mine-by-mine basis between different PPAs. But if you look at the maybe higher level of entity of a mining company giving you a PPA guarantee on a clustering basis, that's something which we can maybe have a look at. But I mean, I think the bottom line is you need to have a viable project. If you have a run-of mine which is short, you can't expect on these PV type of projects to have payback periods of 7, 8 years. And expect longer loan tenors. So at the end of the day, it needs to make sense to the mine in terms of a cost reduction. And from that perspective, I mean, the normal project finance structures are quite well known, and I can't see we moving much away from those type of structures.
Okay.
Can I add something? I think on the equity side, something that I want to raise is obviously your cost of funding of the equity is also critical. I think as an Edison, what we can bring into the table is our yieldcos. Through our yieldcos, I think we can get to a lower cost of equity. Therefore, we have maybe some more flexibility than other competitors to the tenor and the kind of returns that may need it. So that's kind of what San Edison could bring into the table, the yieldco kind of equity chip funding.
I think one thing has always been interesting for me, especially, I'll give you just a short story. We actually in the process of trying to get our first mine, and we were approached by a power solution. And they said, look, we can put up this power plant and we can generate electricity for your mine. But what was interesting about that, what they said is that there's a possibility of us being able to also continue trading some of that additional power into your mines, be it your municipality, whatever it is. So if I come to you and I say, I've got a project, here's my mine, this is my life of mine. My life of mine is 5 years, yes. But I have X amount of off-takers. I have already started having discussions with my municipality or whatever it is. Would the bank look at an option like that, just out of interest?
You mentioned municipalities specifically, so I don't think it's something we will just throw out as not doable, but I think it is extremely complex, especially if you look at multi off-takes, multi PPAs, especially when you bring in the municipalities and the arrangements around themselves. There's not many that are bankable at this point in time. So from a credit point of view, the bank will look at what structures are around that and what type of support. It may be required that you need a national treasury type of backup for a specific municipality. But I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm saying it's extremely difficult. But it may be something that one can pursue depending on what type of structure do you put around it to give you comfort. Mitch, I've tried to answer this difficult one.
Yeah, no, I don't have a lot to add. I think, I mean, all the banks are in the same situation in terms of facing their credit committees, and I mean, having multiple offtake agreements with non-credible entities behind them, unless there's some kind of government guarantee behind that, I mean, would be extremely challenging. And as Rensha says, all the banks would like to be creative in terms of trying to assist where we can, but I mean, these type of structures, I don't see them as the quickest to get to the market.
And is it possible to keep the renewables investment as part of operating expenses for the mine? Is that something that is possible in the current market? Is that something that's being practiced, or is it just something that we are looking at? Are there any what are the pros and cons to that?
I can answer. No, it is possible. Theoretically, it is possible through a PPA or operational lease. There is some hurdles, meaning that the operational lease could be considered a financial lease, and comes all these complexities around what is the impact on the balance sheet and how you introduce that in the balance sheet. In principle, it is possible. I think there's ways to structure the operational lease so that it is considered OPEX, an operating expense, and same for the PPA. However, we will need to time, and a lot of lawyers will need to be involved to get the right agreement in place. But yeah, I think it is possible.
I'm sorry, I think I'm going to ask Derek here, and we spoke quite in length yesterday about who is at risk, who's willing to put up what. And I think that's also the question. If we are saying, if I want to build a car and I believe in this car, I initially put out the capital outlay, and I say, here is something that works, use it, and then once it's been tried and tested and it's going forward, then are you going to keep the ownership of that mine, of that PPA, or the whatever it is, your PV? Who takes the risk? Where's the risk going to lie? Because at the end of the day, you are coming up with an innovative idea to develop something, and you're saying, look, the mines are looking for this, but we have something that's always been running that works, but you want the mine to take the risk of, buying this power, and what happens when it does not run the way you said it's going to run? Who takes the risk there?
I think the answer is pretty short, that it has to be you. If you believe in your product, then go prove it to the mines, and if it does work, then they'll do it. Otherwise, why take the risk on their part? They get pretty cheap electricity, some say. Some might disagree here, but why should they take the risk for a product that's not proven? Rewind a couple of years with renewables, when debt costs were still very high because some of the technologies used were not proven. It's the same story, really. So you have to go out there and prove it to the mines that you have a solution that works. Otherwise, why should they be financing something that might not really work?
And Derek, have you come across some of that resistance within the market currently at all? In terms of the mines not... Oh, Adrian is here.
I think the mines, historically, and I don't mean this to sound in any way negative about mining people tend to be very conservative individuals. They've been using the same sort of machinery for a long time, and they're used to what they use, and they're used to how they get everything they get. As a consequence, it does take time, and it does take education, and it does take convincing. But I think that you do have to have quality, reliable, guaranteed product in order to deliver the right output. Using your analogy of a car, not everybody's going to go out and buy a brand new car that's made in a garage down the street, but people will buy a new car from Ford. And that's the difference. If you're looking at quality panels and quality product and quality everything and guarantees, people will buy.